pre-approval by the court. Now, you may remember, Brian, the Supreme Court struck down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was a preclearance regime that applied to states with histories of discrimination in voting. That case was Shelby County versus Holder.
Basically said that the federal government has to have some oversight into what these states are doing because we just assume that they're going to racially discriminate against black citizens.
Right. And one of the states that was subject to that regime was Alabama. And Shelby County, by the way, is Shelby County, Alabama. And so the Supreme Court, in their wisdom, said, well, times have changed and maybe we don't have to worry about it anymore. But these three judges are saying times may not have changed.
Right.
And we have the power, even without Section 5, without the sort of national scheme, we have the power under Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act to make an individualized determination that a state is still engaged in patterns of racial discrimination in voting, and we can bail them in. And Alabama, you better show up in court wearing your best suit with your best arguments and maybe an apology on your lips, because we're holding a hearing on whether or not you need to be bailed back in to preclearance.
If Alabama is bailed back into preclearance, who is the arbiter of all of this? I mean, the Supreme Court said that preclearance isn't even constitutional or isn't even necessary anymore, and so the federal government doesn't have oversight into what these states' maps look like. But what happens if it's just Alabama that's the only one bailed in?
Yeah. So what the Supreme Court said is that the formula that was used to determine which states were covered and which states were not covered was antiquated, and that times had changed in the South, and that this idea that some states would be automatically sort of blacklisted and other states would be, free to pass their own laws was sort of violated the Constitution's notions of federalism. I think the opinion was total bunk. I thought it was total garbage at the time. But what would happen here is that the three-judge panel of judges in Alabama, they would be the arbiters, right? They would say, look, maybe we don't have this presumption that Alabama is a bad state based on its history, but we have actual facts. I mean, we have the actual instance, not that took place in 1950, not that took place in 1970, not even in the 1990s, that took place in 2023. The state of Alabama was defying court orders to discriminate against black voters. And so we, the court in Alabama, can be the ones who oversee this. I suspect that is where the court is going. It's kind of a cross between the bail-in provision of Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act with a very strong flavor of contempt, a very strong flavor in this opinion that the judges have had enough with the state of Alabama disregarding their court orders and also bad-mouthing the court orders, treating the court orders like they're optional, like they don't say what they say. And Brian, this should ring a bell, because I think this is actually part of a larger pattern that it seems like the Republican sent out a memo to all their
it's this Trump effect, right? Where suddenly everybody sees Donald Trump outright defying, if not on a daily basis, criticizing the courts. And so now it's just monkey see, monkey do in the Republican Party. And so Trump defies the courts, Trump criticizes the courts. And so they all parrot him and do the exact same thing. But, they're learning the hard way that maybe this isn't the best strategy.
Yeah. And look, I to jump topics a little bit, I think Trump is also learning this is not the best strategy. I mean, in the last week, I don't know about you, Brian, but I have noticed in the last week, he looks weaker. He doesn't look like, when he was signing those executive orders and throwing the pens out and the guy, the robotic guy would come in and read them, like they were trying to project strength.
Yeah.
Now with Stephen Miller saying, oh, we're going to have to suspend the writ of habeas corpus, with Donald Trump saying, how many times did Donald Trump say, you have to ask my lawyers? I don't know whether I have this power. I mean, Donald Trump seems like a weakened figure. And I think that Republicans across the board, from Alabama, but also in the White House, are learning that the courts can humble them in a way that can have a real profound impact on not just what they're able to do, but the perceptions of them.
As I mentioned at the top, I'm often really frustrated at the fact that the Trump administration or these Republican officials or anybody who's looking to abuse the judicial system can bring about these lawsuits, and the pro-democracy faction has to be perfect. If these Republicans win even one case, that is a setback for civil rights or voting rights. And yet Republicans can wage these attacks with impunity, and we can only be defensive. And there's really no recourse for anybody waging these attacks, on our democracy more broadly. This is an instance where it actually does look like there is some recourse. And so do you think that this might establish some type of precedent where instead of just allowing Republicans to wage these attacks and Democrats hopefully being perfect, batting 1,000% and fighting all this stuff off, where now Republicans may have to think twice about certainly defying the courts, but even bringing some of this abusive litigation forward, knowing that it's not just like, okay, either best case scenario, we win. Worst case scenario, nothing changes. Now the worst case scenario may very well be, look, that you're all of a sudden bailed back into pre-clearance. And so do you think this will establish some precedent where there is some downside if they want to abuse the judicial system or undermine democracy?
No, look, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think this has a deterrent effect on bad behavior within the Republican Party and among Republican elected officials. My fear is that even in Alabama, I suspect that the Republicans will take pride. And when we get to 2026 campaigns, they will actually celebrate their defiance of the courts. I mean, this is, Donald Trump, ran an entire presidential campaign in which he sort of celebrated his attacks on judges. His presidency has continued to do that. So even though I think it is making them look weaker, and I think it is actually bucking up the judiciary. So I do think in that sense, it's a precedent. In other words, I think each time a judge stands up, another judge stands up a little more too. Like I do think it is leveling up where the court is. And to connect two cases that really, seemingly have nothing to do with one another, I would argue that the Supreme Court's 9-0 decision handing a loss to Donald Trump about the deportation to gulags, that has an impact on judges in a case like this. Like not directly, I'm sure not consciously, but when you see judges and justices doing more and more pro-democracy things to stand up against, these wrongful acts, it undoubtedly creates a more favorable atmosphere. But I don't want to let pass, though, Brian, the other part of your question. And I think this is the great risk that we all face, which is when I go to court, when my team goes to court to fight against voter suppression, Republican gerrymandering, whatever it is, we have to be perfect. Like we can't misstep. We can't make an error. We can't bring the wrong case and create bad law. We can't bring even a good case. And if we lose too many of them, then Republicans gain a sense of invincibility. We have to be perfect and we have to win. And the Republicans don't have that. Like, this last week, the Republicans lost this case in Alabama. You had the Republican judge in North Carolina conceding after a Trump-appointed judge dealt him a loss in the state Supreme Court election. I know you covered that with Justice Riggs. Congratulations to you and her on all of that amazing coverage that you did throughout all of this. We saw Republicans lose an important election case for them in the state of New York involving whether elections would be on even-numbered years or odd-numbered years. And we saw Donald Trump lose a series of cases, including one just as the weekend began involving the reorganization of the government. The problem is they can lose all those cases and they just come up with another round of terribleness. And on our side, if we had lost any of those, if we had lost the case in North Carolina, you and I'd be doing a video about what that means as a precedent around the country.
Right.
If we had lost this in Alabama, we'd be talking about the catastrophic effect that'll have on Black voting rights throughout the country. If New York had lost that case, it would have empowered Republicans in that state to do some pretty terrible things. And so there is this asymmetry. And I wish, Brian, I could tell you I know the way out of that box, but that is what we live with and will continue to live with at least until Donald Trump is no longer in the White House.
Well, the reality is that to your exact point, that we need to be perfect in our litigation. You and your team often are, and thank God we have you guys, fighting on the front lines in the courts to preserve our democracy and to fight back against these abuses by the Republican Party. For everybody watching right now, one very small step that we can all take to support Mark and lift up his voice and his team's voice is to subscribe to his